All it takes is one user accessing the wrong website, either accidentally or by following a phishing link that could potentially compromise your entire network. In this video, we'll show you how to configure Cloud Secure Web Gateway baseline policies that keep users safe and productive by blocking access to harmful or non-compliant sites. With advanced content filtering, SSL inspection, integrated threat intelligence, sandboxing, CASB, DLP integrations, web isolation, centralized policy enforcement, we'll show you how you can stop threats before they ever reach your endpoints. Okay, so if you decided that you're going to deploy, or you've just deployed Symantec Cloud Secure Web Gateway or Cloud SWG, there's about 5 initial steps that you want to go through to make sure that your configuration is set up for allowing you to then sort of progress and create rules and content filtering for your users. So the first thing you're probably going to want to do is to create a policy within the Integrated Cyber Defense Manager console, the ICDM console, for this SC endpoint. But first off, if I just show you here, I have a browser open on my test machine here. First thing I'm going to show you is if I go into my Symantec agent that's already pre-installed onto this endpoint, you'll see that we don't currently have Cloud SWG deployed. We can see here that it's not currently enabled. Software is there, but there's no policy controlling in the background. So effectively, it's been turned off. And we can also double check that then by going to Symantec's test URL. So we go to this pod.threatpulse.com, and we can see here that our page, we're not currently protected. So browsing from this endpoint, there is no protection from a web perspective being deployed at the moment. So as I said, the first thing that we're going to want to do is to deploy a web and cloud access protection policy to this endpoint. So in order to complete that, we need to come into our ICDM console. We're going to go down to our policies. We're going to go filter for a particular policy type, which is going to be web and cloud access protection. And in here, then I want to create a new policy. So we give our policy a name, which is going to be just that we're doing web and cloud access protection policy in our demo lab here. I'm going to click add. We'll scroll all the way down to the bottom and we can select the web and cloud access protection. So that goes ahead and creates our policy for us. So you can see here, this policy is now created. Now we want to do this obviously in tunnel mode. And one of the first things we're going to need to allow us to integrate our ICDM console with the Cloud SWG console is to grab an integration token. So in order to grab that token, we need to go to the Cloud Secure Web Gateway. We're going to drop down into our connectivity. We're going to go down into our Symantec endpoint integrations. And in here, you can see we've got a number of tokens available. And it's this top token here for SEP versions 14.3 and then above. We want to grab our integration token here. So we can click on copy. We can pop back into our ICDM console. We will paste in our token here. And then we need to, before you can proceed or save the policy, you need to click on this validate button. We expect to see then this green tick, which tells us now that that's the correct token that we've grabbed. And we've now set up proper integration between our web cloud access protection policy in the ICDM console with our actual Cloud SWG gateway console. So you can go ahead and save that policy. I'll cancel this in a moment. I have already one created here. As you can see, so this is set up in tunnel mode. Our identity is going to be based on the user on the console, and we see that we already have our network integration token here applied to that. So now that we've got that done, we then want to go and apply this policy. So again, we go into our apply policy. We're going to find the specific device group where we have our endpoint. That's going to be in here. So I'm going to apply the policy to this particular device group. And we're going to have it enabled on all of our locations. Click on next, click on submit. And that policy is now applied to that device group. So if we pop into our device groups, to technical, to Dublin, workstations, and we can see here this is where our test endpoint is. And if we click on policies, we can now see that we've got this web and cloud access protection policy assigned here. Now, it'll take about 1 or 2 minutes for this to actually reflect on the endpoint. We've just applied that policy from within the ICDM console. We can double check that now. We can open up our Symantec endpoint agent. We can go to our options here and change settings. And we see now that web and cloud access protection has been enabled on the endpoint. We can also see that if we go into help troubleshooting, we can scroll down to web and cloud access protection. We can see the status is connected. You can see my user there. We can see the protocol and we can see the data center that we're actually connecting to. Okay, so that means we've now deployed our policy to our endpoint. Our endpoint has now accepted that policy and we will now be protected. So if we go back to our browser page, this previously, as we'd seen, was telling us we were not protected. If I click refresh on this now, we now see that we are indeed protected. If we click on more information there, we can see some data about the IP address, the data center that we're coming out from, the agent information, what the browser is being used, some information like that. We see now that all traffic now coming out of this endpoint is going to be protected. Well, that's not quite true in the initial status, because by default, when you deploy Cloud SWG, the SSL inspection component is not actually enabled. So if I go into our policies, if we go into SSL inspection, we can see that that's currently disabled. Now, why is that important? Well, the majority of traffic now that your users are going to be browsing is not going to be over HTTP, it's going to be over HTTPS. So they're going to be using TLS, SSL, encryption on that. The problem with that is that we need to be able to see inside that traffic stream, because if we're going to be doing content filtering and threat analysis on whatever your users are browsing for, we want to be able to see inside that traffic as they are browsing it. So second thing you need to do then when you're deploying CloudSWG is come into policy, go into our SSL interception, and basically go in and enable this. So if I enable this and then click activate our policy changes, so this gives us a breakdown of what's occurring now. So by default, there are a number of rules that are already created for this SSL inspection. Again, it's quite granular here about you can control yourself what traffic is going to be inspected and what traffic is not going to be inspected. So at the top, we've got a TLS and SSL bypass list. This is going to be any websites that don't allow for content inspection or SSL interception. If they're going to be using certificate pinning, something along those lines, we can add those websites in. We also want to be able to make sure that we're going to be not intercepting anything associated with trading, finance, health information, PPI information, that kind of stuff, banking data. We can also configure to make sure that we're not going to intercept any of that traffic as well from that perspective. I just hit cancel there on that. Next set of rules we have down here is we've got mobile app bypass. So basically any mobile applications, again, that can't suffer SSL inspection, they would be added in here as well. And then our last rule out down at the bottom is basically for all other traffic that we're going to be a catch-all. So any other traffic then that's going through the endpoint or going through that network interface on my computer is going to be intercepted. You can add rules in here as necessary. So if we want to add a new rule in, whether you want to either intercept it or not, we can click on add sources. We get a large selection of what we're going to use. So we can do users or a user list, or we can do groups, or we can do it by location. So there's multiple different methodologies for us to be able to select what our source is going to be. That's where the data is coming from. So what user, what computer, what location, those kind of things. And then we want to classify our destination. So our destination then, where that user is going to be browsing to. And again, that can be based on category of particular websites. It can be based on the domain URL itself. If you want to be more specific, so you see we've got Amazon in here, various different websites. You can make a decision on what your destination is going to be. And then lastly, the verdict itself. So what do you want to do with this particular traffic that you're creating this rule for? You either want to allow it to be intercepted, or you want to allow it to bypass interception. And again, as I've highlighted earlier, that's going to be because some particular websites won't suffer SSL inspection because they might use certificate pinning or some other methodology in the background that might actually break access to the website if you are trying to inspect that traffic. So that was step number 2 that we wanted to complete then. Third step really is going to be into threat protection and to enable what's called high-risk isolation. So if we go into our threat protection, we can see here, I've already enabled it in my console here, but you'd go into your threat protection settings. You see isolation settings here on the top. If you click on this, you get the option to either enable or disable your high-risk isolation settings. Now, what is high-risk isolation doing for you? Well, as your users are browsing a particular website, if they go to a website that has potentially malicious content on it, we can have that website isolated. What that means is we're spinning up a virtual disposable container in the cloud, and all your browsing is occurring from within that container in the cloud. It's not happening at the actual endpoint. All the user is going to see is a screen scrape of that. So the data is rendered correctly on their screen, but there's no actual connection between the website they're browsing and the actual endpoint. Now, this is beneficial because it allows your user to go to potentially malicious websites. They can even actually click on some weaponized content, and that might detonate, but it's going to detonate in that virtual disposable container in the cloud. It's not going to actually reach the endpoint. So it allows your users to be 100% sure that they're safe and they're not going to have any piece of malware try and slink across through that browser session. So you can see here in this instance, I already have the isolation rules enabled, and I'll just show you what they look like. So down here, we can see we've got H1, H2, and H3. These are our browser isolation profile configurations. And basically what we're saying is, depending on Symantec's Global Intelligence Network rating of a website, so they keep an extensive database about the validity and of any websites that you're going to be visiting. So anything that's going to be considered as a risk between 5 and 6, or if that site is actually uncategorized, then we're going to isolate that website in that virtual disposable container that I already mentioned. Anything with a suspicious level of 7 or 8 is also going to be isolated, but we're going to isolate that in a read-only profile, and I'll show you what that contains in a moment. And lastly then, if it's super malicious, risk level 9 or 10, then we're just going to go ahead and block that. Now you could, again, allow the user to be isolated in those instances. But for the scenario here, when we initially deploy this and we've got our HRI policies, those 3 policies are the default ones that get created. Now, if I click into our HRI profile here, basically we've got some configuration settings. These aren't changeable at the moment unless you've bought a full isolation license from Symantec. But you would have the ability to come in here and change some of these settings. But generally what we're saying here is that for anything with a risk level of 5 or 6, or that's uncategorized, we're just going to basically isolate that page. Now, some of the things here that we'll be able to notice, and I'll show you in a browser in a second, when you go to a page that is isolated, you'll get a red banner across the top of the page. Again, I'll show you that in a second. That's just to help indicate to users that the site that they're visiting is actually being isolated and it's only visible in that virtual disposable container in the cloud. When we go to our suspicious levels of risks, level 7 or 8, again, we've set a high-risk isolation read-only profile here. Now, the benefit of this is this allows the user to go to a particular website or page, or even if they've been redirected there maliciously by a phishing link or something, but the user won't be able to enter any content. They'll be able to view the page, but they won't be able to enter any of their details, their username, their password, any other sensitive information that an attacker might be trying to grab if the user has actually just followed some sort of a phishing link. Again, I'll show you that in a second. You'll note here I have one rule in here above this, which is already providing me to direct access without being isolated to a website called pastebin.com. So if we just go to pastebin.com here at the moment, we've seen we're protected already. So I open up a new tab and I'm going to go to pastebin.com. Now, pastebin.com is a known website where users can generally share and collaborate with source codes, those bits and pieces like that. But I've set a rule already in the Cloud SWG console that's bypassing my isolation, which allows me to directly access it. And the reason I want to do that, you'll notice there's no red banner across the top of the page here, and I can right click and go and view source code. So if I view the source code of the page here, we'll see we obviously get the normal sort of data that's contained here, all your CSS and style sheets. But this is where malicious sort of content can be hidden in a website. And this is what we see on the website when I don't have any isolation on it. Now, what I want to show you is the difference then when we come back to the site after I re-enable my isolation again. So in order for me to now make sure that I can isolate it when I go to Pastebin, I need to disable this particular rule that I've set here that is allowing me direct access at the moment. So I'm going to select that rule. I'm going to select disable. I'm going to activate that policy changes. Okay, so we see now that I've disabled that rule that's allowing me direct access to Pastebin. So Pastebin, as I said, I know this is a risk rating of level 5. So according to that, that means then that basically the website should be isolated when we try to access it. So the change of the activation policy there is generally reflected fairly quickly on the endpoint. I don't need to go in there and check. I guess the first thing we'll do is go into our website. If we open up a new page, actually I'll go into a new private window. And in here, if we select pastebin.com, now I've got access to the website, but you know straight away we've got this red banner across the top. That's basically indicating to me as a user that I have now gone to a website that is being isolated. And if I go down here and I view source code, you see the difference between what we'd seen previously. So all of those multiple lines of code that potentially might hide some malicious content have now been removed, because basically that's all happening up in that virtual disposable container in the cloud. On the actual website itself, this is the only stuff we see when we view the source of the page. And obviously the most important bit there, we can see we've got our base isolation script, which is telling us that our website is now being rendered in that virtual disposable container in the cloud. So that's quite cool. And if I try to go to any other website that was going to be risk level 5, 6, 7, or 8, then I'm going to get the same thing. Anything with 9 or 10 is obviously then going to be blocked rather than isolated for me. So that's the next stage that you want to go through. So that was number 3, I believe, for going in for the high-risk isolation. So the next thing you're going to want to do is probably go in and set some sort of primary blocks that you don't want your user to be able to access. So from a content filtering perspective, you may or may not know what rules you want to set there, but you can be pretty certain there's a certain number of websites or certain types of websites that you probably want to block off the bat. So if I scroll all the way down to the bottom here, we've got our blocked categories section. And you see we've got 25 in here at the moment. So this is where you're going to be blocking the kind of unsavory websites that you don't want any of your users to be accessing. So this is going to be for hacking, suspicious content, anything that's got to do with pornography, or anything website even that's uncategorized, nudity, marijuana, any of those kind of things. So a couple of things I want to add in here. So there's 2 that are missing from that for me at the moment, which is going to be violence and intolerance and weapons. So all I need to do on the available category section is scroll down, locate the 2 website categories that I don't want to allow users to get access to, and click this arrow button to move them over to this site here. So I've now added in violence and weapons into that. I'm going to save that as my new policy. I'm going to activate my policy up here to activate all pending policy changes. And again, then when I go to my website now, if I go to my test browser, so we were on Pastebin. If I now go to something associated with games, we should see now straight away that I get blocked. So my access is denied. This is the information that's provided to the user. One benefit here, and should be known, is you get this little more button. If you click on this, this is basically going to give you some information about why that was blocked. And we can see here straight away, we're going down to the RID is content filtering rule G. So we go into our console. If I go into our content filtering, and if we go down to see our rule G4 is going to be, we're blocked on games. So down here, we see G4. That was where we had our blocked categories for that. Again, if I go back into our web browser, we select another page. We had added in weapons and intolerance. So if I try and go to something like Gun Digest, again, we'll see straight away that I'm going to be blocked from accessing that website. And I think I have one other one in here. No, games and Gun Digest, that was it. So just to recap on that, that was the fourth step that we'd mentioned, where you want to go in and basically set your baseline blocking for categories and websites that you don't want your users to be able to access off the bat. Now, after that, then it's really up to yourself about what sort of rule sets you want to enable to allow your users or block them from using particular websites. But again, with CloudSwig, it's not necessarily just that straightforward. You can add some additional rule sets or parameters on the back of what you want to allow users to access. For example, I have some pre-canned rules here that I've done under our content filtering. These are currently disabled, so I'm going to enable them. But at the moment, if I test access to some other websites here, I've got access to the BBC News site. So again, that renders immediately for me. I have then the ability to go and look at MSNBC, for example. Again, that website will render successfully for me. That's fine. So as I mentioned, I've got some pre-canned rules in here that I'm now going to enable. So I'm going to enable rule 2 and 3 here. Enable, and then we activate our policy changes. So what I've done with these particular rules, if I go in and edit. So my source, as I mentioned earlier, we can add in various different types of source, whether it's user groups, locations, geolocation information, that. I've basically put in my username here, so I'm going to be the source. My destination then, again, we can add or edit here. Destinations can be CASB applications. It can be a particular category for a website. They could be just a specific domain or URL for that website. In this instance here, I've set this up for bbcnews.com. And rather than allowing direct access, so you've got the verdict of what you want to happen to the rule set that you've created here, is I'm saying I want to allow access to this website, but I want to do it with Coach. Basically, coaching means that you're going to give the user a notification to say, look, we're monitoring what you're doing here. You're going to this website. If you really need it for work, you can go ahead and do it, but just to be aware that we're going to be monitoring that for you. So that's what we're allowing access with what's called Coach in that particular rule. The second rule then that I've got down here, very similar again. I've gone and I've set my source, which is going to be my user. The destination is going to msnbc.com. And on our verdict down below here, I'm saying, look, I'm going to block access to that website unless you have a specific override password, which you can utilize there. So you could give that to a particular team or a particular division. Maybe one user or manager might have that password. And if a user needs to access the website that you are trying to somewhat restrict access to, they have the ability to do it. And we can get reprompted for that password every 60 minutes, or we can go in and change basically how often that redirect or that reoccurrence of the request of that password. So if we go back into our browser now, again, I'm just going to open up a new in private browser just to make sure there's no caching or anything happening there. So let's say we go to our BBC website. So the minute I try to access the website, again, you see that I get this basically confirm access page. So it looks very similar to the block page. But it's saying here, if you've got legitimate access or a reason to access this website, then click on this to accept. But we've just notified the user that we're monitoring this activity now. And again, if they do need to access it for whatever reason, they can click on accept, and then they can access straight to the BBC website. The other rule I created then, which was with an override password. So if I now try and go into MSNBC, see, I'll get the block page again. Now it's asking me though for the override password. So if I don't know it, obviously I'm not going to get access to that page. I, of course, do know this. I can enter that password, and what I set the password to. And there we can see when I enter the successful password, I can get access to that website. So that's pretty much the kind of 5 first steps you need to take when you are deploying CloudSwig. Number 1, as I said, was you want to go and create your policy, your CloudSwig policy. I will just mention, if you don't have Symantec endpoint security endpoint already deployed to your workstations, you don't necessarily have to have SEP on the endpoint. You can just go ahead and deploy the WSS agent if that's required. And again, we would do that by coming into agent settings here under our connectivity. We get the ability to download for Windows or download for Mac OS, whichever client or agent you need to do there. When we were discussing the SSL interception, you have the ability, now if you already have an agent deployed, so whether it's a SEP agent or a WSS agent, that certificate that's required to allow us to inspect that traffic is already included with that agent. If you're using some other methodology for directing your traffic out to the CloudSwig, you may need to download the actual certificate for that. It will be required on the endpoint, but again, you get the ability to do that from your policy here under SSL interception. We can click on this interception certificate, and we can download the certificate here if necessary for installing on our endpoint. So you would install that onto your actual endpoint, and then that would allow you to have SSL interception occurring on the actual end.